When Karoline Leavitt took legal action against the media, they laughed. But when the evidence surfaced, they weren't laughing anymore. They pleaded. They scrambled. They begged her to put an end to it. Inside the studio, the air felt dense. Not with smoke. Not with noise. But with something heavier. A suffocating silence. A pressure that couldn't be seen, only felt. The cameras were already rolling. The crew? Frozen. Every single one of them locked in place, eyes flicking between one another, waiting, anticipating, dreading. All eyes were on the host. She inhaled. A deep, steady breath. Not the kind you take absent-mindedly. No. This was deliberate. The kind of breath you take when you're about to do something irreversible. And then, she leaned forward, fingers tightening around the desk. Maybe a little too hard. Maybe hard enough to show she wasn't as steady as she wanted to be. She did the unthinkable. Karoline, please. I'm asking you. End this lawsuit. For everyone's sake. The words fell into the room, but they weren't controlled, weren't as firm as she'd hoped. There was a tremble, a shake she hadn't intended. But it was too late to take them back. Too late to soften the impact. This woman, the same one who had built her career on relentless criticism, on her refusal to ever bend, especially not to those she deemed a threat, was now doing something she never imagined she would. She was pleading, on live television, with the very person she once called a danger to democracy. This lawsuit, it had sent shockwaves through political media. $800 million. That number wasn't just a number. It was a wrecking ball. A death sentence for careers, for networks, for legacies built over decades. Karoline Leavitt had sued for defamation, dragging some of the most powerful names in news into a battle that had already cost millions just in legal fees. At first, they laughed it off, brushed it aside like another political stunt. But now? Now, it was something else entirely. This wasn't about a lawsuit anymore. It was about survival. And tonight, with every second that passed, the desperation in the host's voice bled through more and more. This isn't about ideology anymore. Her hands moved as she spoke, grasping at the empty air, as if trying to hold onto something already slipping away. It's about the damage this is doing. To our industry. To journalism. To the people who dedicate their lives to informing the public. To the very idea of a free press. A strange moment, not because of what she was saying, but because of who was saying it. Months ago, this woman had been leading the charge, fueling the very rhetoric that turned this case into an inferno. She had fired her shots, made her points. She had believed fully, completely, that she was standing on the right side of history. But now? Now, under the glare of the studio lights, under the weight of what she knew, she wasn't so sure anymore. Because this lawsuit, it wasn't just a legal fight anymore. It had become a wildfire, burning through relationships, through alliances, through the very foundation that kept major networks standing. Reporters had already been fired, executives forced into secret meetings, whispering behind closed doors, scrambling to contain the damage before it consumed them all. And worst of all, the world was watching. Ratings had skyrocketed, but not because people cared about the truth. No. Because they wanted to see the carnage. A slow-motion disaster unfolding in real time. Some craved blood. Some wanted justice. But everyone had chosen a side. There was no neutral ground left. The host swallowed hard. There was a reason she was saying this now. Something had changed. She had heard things. Seen things. Whispers behind the scenes about what could happen next. What certain people, powerful people, were willing to do to protect themselves. Because that was the truth, wasn't it? This wasn't about right or wrong anymore. It was about power, leverage, control. And so here she was. A woman who built her brand on being unshakable, on never backing down, now staring into the camera, begging. You don't have to prove anything, Karoline. You've already won. People are scared. You've made your point. Silence. She let it stretch, hoping, praying that it would be enough. But hope wasn't enough anymore. And the real battle, it was only just beginning. When politicians and the press clashed, it was nothing new. But this time was different. Karoline Leavitt wasn't suing over a simple misquote. She wasn't outraged over an exaggeration. She was coming for everything. The networks, the executives, the hosts, the journalists, and the money that kept their empire alive. $800 million. This wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a death sentence for an entire industry. And it all traced back to a single moment. A live panel discussion broadcasted 6 months ago. A group of journalists, including the very host now begging for peace, had speculated on air about Leavitt's alleged involvement in something serious. But they had nothing. No proof. No verified sources. Just whispers, rumors, repeated so many times they started to sound like fact. Leavitt, young but politically ruthless, had been watching. She had seen what unchecked media narratives could do. And this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. She struck back. Hard. Her legal team was relentless, filing lawsuits not just against a single network, but against multiple outlets. Journalists, producers, executives. No one was safe. Subpoenas were issued. Emails, phone records, internal Slack messages, dragged into the light. And suddenly, it wasn't so funny anymore. The same journalists who had mocked the lawsuit? Now, they were deleting tweets. Some disappeared entirely. Silent. Vanishing from social media as if they had never existed at all. Behind the scenes, panic, emergency meetings, executives scrambling, legal teams searching for a way out, networks distancing themselves from their own people, issuing weak, half-hearted statements about journalistic integrity, while quietly preparing severance packages. But Leavitt? She wasn't backing down. She didn't want retractions. She didn't want apologies. She wanted something else. She wanted payback. And the worst part? She had the upper hand. Her legal team had something big. Something the networks weren't prepared to fight against. Proof. Documents. Recordings. Internal memos. Behind closed doors. Even the most trusted names in journalism had admitted it. They had been reckless. They had run with a narrative, not because it was true, but because it was the story they wanted to believe. And now, it was too late to take it back. The media had underestimated her. They assumed she'd take the hit, like so many others before. Issue a statement. Express outrage. Then move on. But Leavitt? She wasn't just another politician. She was young, ambitious, and dangerous in a way they hadn't recognized. She understood something most politicians didn't: how to play the game. This wasn't just about money. She was making a point, reminding them all that they weren't untouchable. That no one, no matter how powerful, could manipulate a narrative without consequence. And as the trial date loomed closer, the fear became undeniable. Whispers turned into frantic phone calls. Journalists who had once scoffed at the lawsuit, now they were lawyering up. Some, in secret, were negotiating settlements, desperate to escape before the worst of it hit. And then, there was the host, a woman who had built her entire career on being fearless, unshakable. Now, she was pleading, not because she believed in peace, not because she thought Leavitt was right, but because she had seen what was coming next. If this lawsuit made it to trial, it wouldn't just be about one case. It would change everything. But what exactly had been uncovered that made the media so desperate to shut this lawsuit down? It started as a rumor, a whisper from an anonymous source. At first, no one believed it. There was no way, no possible way, that Karoline Leavitt's legal team had secured something capable of bringing an entire media empire to its knees. Then one night, an email arrived, an anonymous sender. It landed in the inbox of a senior producer at one of the networks being sued. The subject line? "You need to hear this." Attached, an audio file. The producer clicked play. What they heard was worse than anything they had imagined. A private conversation. Not a public panel. Not a recorded interview. But something far more damning. A behind-the-scenes discussion between senior executives. lead anchors, political strategists. And they weren't just talking about Karoline Leavitt. They were orchestrating the coverage, coordinating narratives, deciding in real time what the public would be told and what would be buried. How do you shape public perception? Not with facts, with strategy. The voices on the tape were unmistakable. One of them, a high-profile journalist, could be heard saying, "Look, it doesn't matter if we can't prove it. We just have to make people doubt her. That's enough." Another voice, a network executive, responded, "If we say it enough times, it becomes reality. She won't survive it." Then came the part that sent chills through every legal team who got their hands on it. A third voice, one of the most respected names in the industry, stated plainly, "We'll bury her. And if it turns out we're wrong, we'll just move on like we always do." The producer listening to the tape froze. This wasn't just bias. This wasn't just reckless journalism. This was intent. This was proof that behind closed doors, some of the biggest names in media weren't just reporting the news. They were crafting weapons. And the worst part? Leavitt's team had the recording. It had been leaked to them by someone on the inside. And now? It was evidence, not just for the lawsuit, but for something much bigger. Suddenly, everything changed. Lawyers who had planned to fight Leavitt in court backpedaled. Networks that had mocked her lawsuit as frivolous scrambled to contain the damage. Because if that recording made it into a courtroom, it wouldn't just be one lawsuit anymore. It would be the end. Reputations, careers, entire networks, the power brokers of political media, had always operated under one assumption: that no matter what happened, they would be protected, that even if they got caught, the news cycle would move on. But this time, there was no moving on. The industry was bleeding. And Leavitt? She had the knife. And now the host, the woman who had spent her career fighting against everything Leavitt stood for, was begging her to put the knife down. Not for justice, not for truth, for survival. Because if Leavitt didn't stop now, the media's worst nightmare was about to become reality. But what would happen if she refused? And who was really pulling the strings behind the scenes? The moment that recording surfaced, the power players in media and politics knew they had a crisis on their hands. But in the halls of corporate newsrooms, in political offices, panic wasn't an option. Decisions had to be made. Fast. Some wanted to fight. They argued that the recording could be discredited, dismissed, spun into a conspiracy. After all, the media had survived worse. There were always ways to twist a story, ways to turn even the most damning evidence into misinformation. But others? They saw the writing on the wall. This wasn't just about Karoline Leavitt anymore. This was about control. If this lawsuit went to trial, if that recording was played in court, the damage wouldn't stop at one network. It would tear through every major news outlet that had ever done the same, pushing narratives, manipulating stories, protecting the right people, while destroying those who threatened their influence. So the real discussions, the ones that mattered, were happening far away from the cameras, in closed-door meetings, at the highest levels of media and politics. The biggest names in news were making calls they never thought they'd have to make. How do we make this go away? The answer? Pressure. Karoline Leavitt was already facing public scrutiny. She was young, ambitious, and, as far as they were concerned, dangerous. But even the most powerful people in the country had underestimated her. Because Leavitt, she wasn't backing down. She wasn't taking the money. She wasn't playing their game. She had one goal: exposure. She wanted the world to see exactly how deep the rot went. And the more they pushed, the more determined she became. So they switched tactics. If Leavitt couldn't be bought, if she couldn't be threatened into submission, they needed another way to stop her. That's when the whispers began. Leaks started appearing online. Headlines shifted the focus. Stories about Leavitt's past, her personal life, her finances. Everything was on the table now. They were building a counterattack. And leading that attack, the same host, who was now begging her to back down. She had spent months being one of the loudest voices against Leavitt. And for a while, she had believed every word of I.